Chapter 61. Qi Zhenbai's Jealousy. 1. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Wife. Qi Zhenbai said flatly as he enunciated the word through gritted teeth. The temperature in the room plummeted to 0 degrees Celsius. His eyes were sharp with an unconscious malevolence and concealed anger. His words were like ice shards, and also extremely aggressive. Zhu Buqing had no idea of his best friend's rage and violent inclinations, and thought that he was agreeing with him. The more he thought about it, the more he felt that marrying Sister Xu Yan would be the best thing ever. Not to mention his own safety, if any of his friends came to his door in the future, his wife would absolutely be able to fix it. There was everything to gain and nothing to lose in marrying such a capable wife. Besides, Sister Xu Yan was beautiful, so he really liked her quite a bit. As for the matter of a strong woman and a weak man's self-esteem, that was inconsequential. The more Zhu Buqing thought about it, the better he felt. He continued excitedly, "Yeah, Zhenbai, I'm finding Sister Xu Yan better and better now. She's beautiful and isn't delicate and melodramatic. We were brought together by fate, so maybe we're destined to marry." Destined to marry. Qi Zhenbai repeated gloomily. His words seemed to be squeezed out through the gaps between his teeth, and with a click, he subconsciously crushed the glass in his hand. "Zhenbai, what's that sound over there?" Zhu Buqing was still looking excited and expectant when he suddenly heard an inexplicable sound on the other end of the phone. "It's nothing, I'm hanging up." Qi Zhenbai rudely hung up and let out a shaky breath, but it stuck in his chest and he became more and more depressed and aggrieved, as if a huge rock was weighing down on him. He had always been a calm person, but when he thought of what Zhu Buqing had just said, an unprecedented sense of brutality suddenly welled up in his heart. The concealed anger in his heart didn't diminish but grew instead. He pressed down on his bulging veins and resisted the extreme urge to punch someone. The managers of several departments standing in Qi Zhenbai's office watched in trepidation. Young Master Qi was on the verge of losing his temper. The air around them seemed to have frozen. They looked at each other, wiped the cold sweat on their foreheads in fright, and complained endlessly in their hearts. Had they known that young Master Qi was in a bad mood today, they would have come in a little earlier to report and avoid facing down the barrel of this gun. "We have a meeting in 10 minutes. Qi Zhenbai commanded, and the managers heaved sighs of relief when they heard this. Zhu Buqing, who was unceremoniously hung up on, felt wronged. His friend was really becoming more and more temperamental. Hence, he simply called Qi Xu Yan in Fuzhou again. That when he called, Qi Xu Yan was helping Lin Chongchang look at feng shui in his 1,000-acre villa. Lin Chongchang also asked her to pick one of his favorite antiques from his entire collection as a gift. Before Qi Xu Yan picked out what she liked, she first picked out 3 antiques that contained the scent of purple moss. Looking at Lin Chongchang, whose face was extraordinarily unsightly, she guessed in her heart that he must have a good idea of who had harmed him, which was why he looked so grim. "Sister Xu Yan, are you free?" Zhu Buqing asked enthusiastically. "Yeah, why?" Qi Xu Yan had been reviewing her textbooks again recently, and compared with the other students, who were engrossed in their studies, she was already bored to death. "That's great. There's no time like the present. Sister Xu Yan, you might as well come to my house as a guest," Zhu Buqing said happily, as if afraid that she would reject him. He hurriedly listed a bunch of reasons to block her refusal, and even slipped in mention of his parents. "Ever since I explained to them about my car accident in Fuzhou, my parents have wanted to see you and thank you in person. If you don't give me face, it'll be like not giving my parents face. Sister Xu Yan, you can't refuse me, or I'll be heartbroken to death." Qi Xu Yan laughed. This was way too enthusiastic. "The people in the capital are all very cordial. If you came to my house, you'll definitely feel at home as a guest and as close as family," Zhu Buqing teased and joked. Qi Xu Yan laughed when she heard that. "Since you said it so well, wouldn't it be a sin if I don't go?" This person was really a living treasure, and she kind of wanted to befriend him. Zhu Buqing was stunned for a moment on the other end of the line before he immediately became overjoyed. Sister Shuyan, just wait. I'll book the plane tickets now and come over today, okay? Black lines slid down Qi Shuyan's forehead. Did he have to be so quick? It wasn't like she was going to run, she had planned to look at tickets tomorrow. The villa of the Zhu family. Qi Shuyan looked at the benevolent-looking Zhu parents, who greeted her cordially. She was surprised when they came to pick her up, but calmed down quickly. She didn't dislike spending time with her elders at all, and although the two were overly cordial, they were very sincere. The more Mother Zhu looked at Qi Shuyan, the more she liked her. At first, she was a bit uneasy. After all, capable warlocks were all rather aloof and proud. But after a few rounds of conversation, this little girl proved to have a gentle character. Her attitude was polite, her conduct was even more natural and generous, and she was also pretty and cute. Even if this girl wasn't her son's savior, Mother Zhu still had some favorable impression of her, not to mention that she was her own savior as well, so she liked her even more. As for Father Zhu, ever since he found out that the little girl in front of him was the master that his son said was capable and wanted to marry, he really wanted his son to immediately show his true abilities and win her over, then immediately marry such a generous and capable little girl. Never did he think that his family would obtain such a gain. If he had such a capable daughter-in-law who could protect them, Father Zhu felt that he would wake up smiling from his dreams. This future daughter-in-law was simply too much to his liking. Father Zhu, who had always been a serious man, had a rare gentle smile on his face. He couldn't be any more cordial towards this future daughter-in-law, and was even more so than Mother Zhu. Qi Shuyan had mentally prepared herself before coming, but now, she was terribly frightened by Father and Mother Zhu's astonishing enthusiasm. On the other hand, Zhu Buqing looked at his parents around Qi Shuyan with unconcealable joy on his face. They seemed to get along pretty well, and he was secretly pleased with himself. Sister Shuyan was so good, how could his parents not like her? The phone in his pocket rang again, and when Zhu Buqing saw that it was Qi Zhenbai, he remembered indignantly that he had been hung up on before. His eyes rested on the end call button, but in the end, he didn't have the guts to hang up on Zhenbai. After his phone rang for 10 seconds, he slowly picked up the call and bragged, "Zhenbai, guess who's a guest at my house?" There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Hey, Zhenbai, are you listening? Cut the crap, who's there?" After a while, there was a deep, cold voice on the phone which sounded faintly impatient. "Have a guess." When he heard this tone, Zhu Buqing could imagine Qi Zhenbai impatiently rubbing the space between his eyebrows. He was secretly pleased with himself and deliberately kept Qi Zhenbai in suspense in order to get back at him for repeatedly hanging up on him. "Ching, hurry up and come here. How outrageous, how can you abandon Shuyan to go make some phone call?" Mother Zhu shouted. As soon as Mother Zhu finished speaking, Father Zhu was also terribly anxious and quickly interjected, "That's right, what phone call are you making, when you idle all day long? Hurry up and talk to Shuyan." Damn, were these really his biological parents? Zhu Buqing didn't have time to muffle their voices at all, and grumbled in his heart about how his mother's voice was so loud that Zhenbai must have heard it. When he didn't hear Zhenbai for a long while, he thought he had hung up. Just then, Father Zhu suddenly walked over and whispered in Zhu Buqing's ear, "I'm very satisfied with this daughter-in-law. If you don't hold on tight to her, I'll whip you to death." After saying that, he turned around and left. Dad, Things hadn't even begun, why was his father more anxious than he was? At that moment, Qi Zhenbai's deep and majestic voice came from the phone. "Say hello to Uncle and Auntie for me first, I'll come over later." Chapter 62. Dare Seduce Other Men. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Zhu Buqing was dazed by Qi Zhenbai's decision to come over, his face filled with question marks. What was Zhenbai coming over for? He didn't know if he was mistaken, but he got the feeling that his friend seemed a little too proactive today. When Zhuo Buqing called him to come out, he would be turned down 8 out of 10 times, and directly hung up on the other 2 times. Could it be that his friend's conscience had awakened? Zhu Buqing pondered for a moment and was confident that this was the most logical explanation. He never considered that Qi Shuyan might be the reason. After all, every time the two met, they would be no better off than ordinary strangers if it wasn't for him. Qi Zhenbai arrived at the Zhu family's house. When he entered and stepped into the living room, he saw a harmonious family scene. Father and Mother Zhu were full of smiles as they talked animatedly with Qi Shuyan, who was sitting on the leather sofa across from them. Next to her, Zhu Buqing would turn to the side from time to time and ask her solicitously if she wanted to eat any fruit. With her back to Qi Zhenbai, he couldn't see the expression on her face, but seeing this scene of parents meeting a girlfriend, anger inexplicably welled up from the depths of his heart. His thick eyebrows knitted together deeply, and his majestic, sharp phoenix eyes were dim and bottomless as emotion flashed in them. "Ha, Zhenbai, what are you doing here? Come and have a seat." It was Mother Zhu with her sharp eyes who first spotted Qi Zhenbai coming in. As soon as Mother Zhu said this, the other 3 looked over, and Father Zhu was a bit surprised. Then, with a cordial, fawning look on his face, he hurriedly received Qi Zhenbai and had him sit down. The one thing Father Zhu was most satisfied with about his son was him making good friends with the capable 9th young master of the Qi family. Qi Zhenbai didn't care about Father and Mother Zhu's gazes. His cold slender eyes passed over Qi Shuyan as if at a glance. She turned her head for one moment and met his gaze, but unfortunately, she quickly looked away and lowered her eyes. Her thick eyelashes fluttered like small fans. It was like they were brushing at his heart, which inexplicably skipped a beat. Dim light flashed through his sharp eyes, but only for one fleeting moment, before his frosty gaze finally landed on Zhu Buqing's face. He then shifted his gaze and handed the gift box in his hands to Father and Mother Zhu. "A little token of my appreciation, Uncle and Auntie, please accept it." "Uncle, Auntie, I'm sorry to bother you." Qi Zhenbai's face was deep and cold, with no emotion visible in his dark eyes. He was tall and upright with sharp eyebrows in his pressed suit. Looking at him, he must have just come from the company. There was no need to bring a gift. "Zhenbai, feel free to come when you have the time. This boy, Buqing, has turned over a new leaf." "I haven't thanked you yet, have I?" Father Zhu said cheerfully. Although he was flattering Qi Zhenbai, he wasn't excessive about it, and his affectionate tone was very comfortable to listen to. "Exactly, why did you come with a gift? You're such a sensible and caring child." Mother Zhu was more welcoming than Father Zhu and genuinely fond of Qi Zhenbai. On the other hand, Father Zhu said that the Qi family had a powerful background and Zhenbai was capable. With her son hanging out with the 9th young master of the Qi family, his future would be smooth sailing, so she was also at ease. Of course, most women were into looks, and Mother Zhu was no different. Coupled with Qi Zhenbai's superior upbringing, Mother Zhu's eyes lit up every time she looked at him, and she wished that he was her own son. It was a pity that she had a son who was good-looking but nothing compared with the 9th young master of the Qi family. At that moment, Mother Zhu's tone was extremely gentle. "Zhenbai. Sister Shuyan and I have been waiting for you for a long time." Seeing his good friend this time, Zhu Buqing told himself that he couldn't neglect his friends for a girl. He quickly got up and pulled Qi Shuyan up by the wrist with him to greet Qi Zhenbai. Qi Zhenbai's indifferent eyes instantly sharpened a bit. Zhu Buqing somehow felt that this friend's eyes on him didn't seem right and were a little chilly. "Hi." Qi Shuyan had to greet him even if she didn't want to, but when she saw his face, her face stiffened a bit. Qi Zhenbai didn't seem to see her embarrassment and gave a rare smile. Because he rarely smiled, however, it looked stiff no matter how you looked at it. His eyes narrowed as he stared at their clasped hands, and his smile started to fade. As he drew closer, his imposing manner grew stronger. Zhu Buqing was so startled by his friend's aura that he subconsciously let go, while Qi Shuyan inexplicably felt like she had been caught having an affair. Impossible, she was definitely overthinking it. Seeing that Zhu Buqing had tactfully let go, Qi Zhenbai was satisfied. He finally spoke, but his eyes never left the woman in front of him. He took the initiative to stretch out his hand. Long time no see. Seeing that the man in front of her, who was obsessed with cleanliness, had taken the initiative to reach out to her, Qi Shuyan dazedly stuck out her own hand, which he immediately grasped. In order to not be disdained too much, Qi Shuyan was going to withdraw her hand as soon as she shook his, but a pair of big cold hands held on tightly. She couldn't pull her hand away no matter how hard she tried. Feeling the softness in his hand, Qi Zhenbai suddenly thought of what Celestial Master Zhang said about their deep affinity with each other and how they might be destined to marry. The way he looked at the woman in front of him became more and more unfathomable. He waited a long time before letting go. Before letting go, he pulled her steadily to his side and put some distance between them and Zhu Buqing. The others didn't sense the anomaly in the man in front of him, but Qi Shuyan sensed that he was too different from usual. She was about to speak, when a low, magnetic male voice suddenly sounded. It was so soft that only the two of them could hear, and his tone lacked force. "Stay beside me, you dare seduce other men." Qi Shuyan. "So you two know each other?" Surprised, Mother Zhu was promptly enlightened and didn't think much about it. Although this little girl was young, she was very capable. Since she knew Buqing, it wasn't that strange for her to know Qi Zhenbai, who was in Fuzhou with Buqing. Father Zhu's thinking, on the other hand, wasn't as simple as Mother Zhu's. He was a shrewd businessman with very keen instincts, and could be considered to understand Qi Zhenbai's indifferent workaholic character. That it was really strange for him to suddenly rush over for a so-called friend. Moreover, judging from his suit, he must have just rushed over from the company and probably skipped work. He was also very familiar with that little girl, so Father Zhu's eyes became more and more strange. "Yeah, the three of us have known each other since we were in Fuzhou." Although Zhu Buqing sensed the strange atmosphere and felt that his friend's familiarity with his future wife had increased sharply to the point that they seemed more intimate, he didn't think much of it. Qi Shuyan was truly stumped by the series of actions and words of the man beside her. And what was with his last sentence? What did he mean by staying by his side and daring to seduce other men? They weren't that close, were they? These words weren't suitable for the two of them, were they? Or did this man suddenly have a seizure and had mistaken her for someone else? The more Qi Shuyan thought about it, the more she felt that the man's actions were unfathomable. Compared with him, she was more willing to talk to Zhu Buqing. Qi Shuyan took advantage of the moment when he was exchanging pleasantries with Father and Mother Zhu to turn her head and suddenly lean close to Zhu Buqing's ear and ask, "Is there something wrong with this friend of yours?" Chapter 63. Qi Zhenbai's Jealousy, 2. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Zhu Buqing was glad that he wasn't drinking water at that moment, otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to control himself and would have spat it out on the spot when he heard Sister Shuyan's words. Was this the first time Zhenbai was being scorned by a woman, and so clearly? Zhu Buqing wiped his face and went red from trying not to laugh. At the same time, he was glad that she was indeed the woman he fancied and wasn't charmed by Zhenbai's appearance. Usually, when he was with Zhenbai, Zhenbai would always be the one whom women fawned on. Since meeting them, Sister Shuyan had never acted like that. The more Zhu Buqing thought about it, the happier he was. As long as his friend didn't fight with him, he was still very confident that he could woo Sister Shuyan. He was immediately all smiles and said, "Great minds think alike, great minds think alike." Forget his good looks, he has plenty of shortcomings. "Come, let's go and chat, Sister Shuyan." Qi Zhenbai's face turned frosty when the woman beside him took advantage of him making small talk to turn around to talk to another man and leave with him. Even if the man was Zhu Buqing, Qi Zhenbai's unsightly expression didn't change. First of all, he's a workaholic and a tyrant. He'll work all the way into the night, and he pursues perfection at all costs. His tormented subordinates complain endlessly. I reckon his future wife will become jealous of his work. Zhu Buqing didn't notice his friend's face. Since his friend wasn't interested in Sister Xu Yan, Qi Zhenbai could just be the bridge between him and his wife. He continued to stick close to Xu Yan's side and roast his friend. Also, he's a germaphobe and doesn't like to touch people. He will definitely scorn his wife in the future. With that cold face, his wife will consciously stay 20 feet away from him. Father and Mother Zhu watched their son and the little girl gossip together and smiled knowingly at each other. They felt that they should leave the two young ones alone to cultivate their feelings, and planned to leave the scene quietly together so that they wouldn't feel uncomfortable. Young Master Qi, I remember that you've always been quite knowledgeable about antique jewelry. It's a coincidence that I recently acquired a few new antiques from the Tang and Song annual reviews and have been looking for someone to appraise them. Why don't you come with me to take a look, young Master Qi? Father Zhu inquired respectfully. Qi Zhenbai seemed to be listening to Father Zhu's tone as if he was speaking with his peers, but in fact, his eyes were fixed on the two people sitting very close to each other on the sofa. A sinister and ruthless glint flashed in his phoenix eyes underneath his sharp eyebrows. The lines of his jaw tightened and his face grew more and more irritated. In a normal situation, the observant Father Zhu would definitely have overthought it, but now that he was focused on Zhu Buqing and Qi Shuyan, he didn't really notice Qi Zhenbai's mood. And at that moment, Qi Zhenbai's exposed emotions were immediately restrained, and he looked light-hearted. All right. Before leaving with Father Zhu, Qi Zhenbai didn't forget to turn around and give Zhu Buqing a cold, blade-like, bone-piercing gaze. Zhu Buqing shivered at the sight and his neck turned cold. He had spoken so softly, did Zhenbai hear him? What a blunder. Because of Qi Zhenbai's warning, he didn't dare gossip about him anymore. At the dining table. At night, everyone drooled over the table full of fragrant and tasty dishes, and Qi Shuyan was starving. Father and Mother Zhu warmly welcomed everyone to sit down. Originally, the two wanted Qi Zhenbai to sit in the main seat, but Qi Zhenbai turned it down. As for Qi Shuyan, this guest, she was too young. If they let her sit there, it would only make her uncomfortable. The couple didn't say much and sat down. Qi Shuyan surveyed the group. Father and Mother Zhu naturally sat together, so she chose a seat to the lower right of Mother Zhu. Seeing that Sister Shuyan had chosen her seat, Zhu Buqing subconsciously wanted to sit next to her. However, just as he was about to go over and sit down, Qi Zhenbai was a step quicker and intercepted him. He pulled out the chair and sat down slowly, all in one smooth motion. His frosty phoenix eyes glanced indifferently at Zhu Buqing, and he put his left hand on the back of a chair like an order. You sit here. Zhu Buqing. Why did he get the feeling that his best friend had long coveted this seat? It had to be his illusion. Even Qi Shuyan, who was on the side, was surprised. She didn't expect Qi Zhenbai to be next to her, so she shifted her body to face Mother Zhu more. It wasn't that she was prejudiced, but clearly because of how she had been repeatedly attracted to Zhenbai previously, she didn't dare get close at all. She was afraid that she would accidentally embarrass herself with this tonic pill next to her. That would be hard to explain. In addition, the two of them were going to have a ill-fated relationship in the future. In order to prevent this evil fate from happening, she would stay as far away from him as possible and have less contact with him. Mother Zhu was pulling at her to talk to her, but what Qi Shuyan didn't notice was that when she leaned over, the tall man next to her had a cold, hard face. His thin lips were pursed tightly into a thin line and hidden fury rose in his eyes. His fury went from 30 to 100%, and his fingers subconsciously tightened until they were white. Zhu Buqing distinctly sensed that his friend was on the verge of losing control of his emotions. Other people didn't know, but he knew that the angrier Zhenbai was in his heart, the calmer his face became. At that moment, his friend's face was frightfully calm, but he just couldn't figure out why he was angry. It wasn't good for Zhu Buqing to ask in front of everyone, so he changed the subject. Zhenbai, what's especially fun in the capital? Give me some Rex, and I'll take Sister Shuyan there tomorrow. After speaking, Zhu Buqing quickly whispered in his friend's ear, help me out, Zhenbai. You know that Sister Shuyan is nice and beautiful. As the saying goes, we shouldn't let our own fertile water flow into someone else's field. I plan to keep this in the family. You're busy with work, so I definitely won't bother you this time. After pausing, Zhu Buqing quickly continued, Zhenbai, this is a matter of great importance in my life, so you must help me out. With a crack, the chopsticks in Qi Zhenbai's hand snapped. His face was even more terrifyingly unsightly, his face ashen, and the veins on his forehead bulged tautly as he teetered on the verge of losing control. Zhu Buqing was first startled, then almost jumped up in fright when he saw the emotional loss of control and expression on his best friend's face. All the hairs on his body stood on end. A chill ran up through the soles of his feet. Wait a minute, what did he say wrong? Why did it feel like this friend of his didn't want to give him advice, but wanted to tear him apart? Everyone else was also startled by the noise, especially Mother Zhu. She hurriedly got up and wondered, why did the chopsticks break? I'll get another pair for Zhenbai. Father Zhu hurriedly echoed, right, hurry and get young Master Qi another pair of chopsticks. Qi Shuyan was very sensitive to emotions and also sensed that the man next to her was in a very bad mood, but it wasn't good to probe into other people's privacy, so she could only look at Zhu Buqing. Qi Zhenbai's deep, cold voice suddenly rang out. It wasn't easy for her to come here. As hosts, we should always have manners. It just so happens that I'm free these few days. As soon as he finished speaking, Zhu Buqing gaped in astonishment, wide enough to swallow a duck egg. A faintly absurd idea flashed through his mind, but he also felt that it was highly unlikely. He knew his best friend too well. Love at first sight was completely impossible, and love might not happen for him even after a long time. Zhenbai had always been cold, aloof and heartless. It was impossible for him to fall in love with a woman whom he had only met a few times. Besides, if Zhenbai really liked Sister Shuyan, he definitely wouldn't act like this. It was probably something in his best friend's heart, or perhaps it had something to do with Grandpa Qi. Zhu Buqing took a moment to compose himself, and the more he thought about it, the more he felt that was the case. He heaved a sigh of relief. He was about to speak, when Qi Shuyan said to Zhu Buqing at that moment, anywhere is fine with me. Chapter 64. A Man's Possession, 1, you are listening at novelfull.audio. In the afternoon. Qi Shuyan was in an FV premium clubhouse as she looked at a group of modern and outlandish buildings built in a distinctive style, feeling very surprised. She never thought that the two men would take her to a FV premium clubhouse. L.C. In fact, this wasn't her first visit to FV. The top FV clubhouse was huge and divided into 5 major buildings which housed swimming pools, a fencing club, the stables, and so on. The club frequently ran health, entertainment and leisure activities, while a single major event could encompass more than a dozen minor activities. Those who came here were either from rich or noble families. In her previous life, Qi Shuyan had been entertained several times by wealthy people who had something to ask of her, so she wasn't unfamiliar with this place. Although she was a bit surprised by the extravagance of the two, she was still quite calm. Sister Shuyan, how is it? Zhu Buqing was very surprised to see Qi Shuyan acting like usual on her first time here. It had to be known that even ordinary wealthy people who were able to squeeze their heads into this place would be as shocked as ignorant bumpkins, to say nothing of many ordinary girls who would be overwhelmed with delight. Zhu Buqing looked at Qi Shuyan's calm expression and thought even better of her. This place is pretty good. Qi Shuyan smiled slightly. Zhu Buqing was about to say something, but then saw Qi Zhenbai, who was dressed in a casual outfit, striding over on long legs from behind Qi Shuyan. Zhu Buqing waved his hand and led the way, and raised his arm to put it around Qi Zhenbai's shoulders. However, Qi Zhenbai rudely took a few steps back and dodged with a disgusted face. Zhu Buqing didn't mind at all, he knew what his friend was like. He asked, "What should we try out first?" "Shooting range." Qi Zhenbai shot a glance at Qi Shuyan and opened his mouth. "Okay, I love shooting." Zhu Buqing calculated in his heart and his eyes flashed. He smiled at Qi Shuyan in passing and said, "Sister Shuyan, have you ever tried shooting before?" Qi Shuyan had been to an FV club in her past life, but had never tried shooting. She played more relaxed activities, such as golf and bowling, so she shook her head. Seeing Qi Shuyan shake her head, Zhu Buqing's eyes lit up and his smile grew wider. He leaned close to her and gently comforted her. "It's fine, I can teach you." Naturally, he had been hoping that Qi Shuyan didn't know how to shoot. If she did, how could he get close to her to nurture their relationship? "Okay, cut the crap, let's go." Qi Zhenbai took a step forward, forcefully and seemingly inadvertently separating the two. On the way to the shooting range, Zhu Buqing couldn't find a chance to get close to Qi Zhenbai and speak with him. He gave Qi Zhenbai, the huge light bulb, a few resentful glances. If his friend's face hadn't been the same the entire time, he would have suspected his friend of doing it on purpose. Zhu Buqing shook his head inwardly to clear it of this absurd thought. How could his best friend have done it on purpose? He had never been close to women, and simply lacked the chromosomes for love and passion. Besides, his best friend and sister Shuyan seemed quite unfamiliar with each other, so he assumed he was imagining things. The three entered the shooting range. Qi Zhenbai and Zhu Buqing were obviously familiar with the place. Qi Shuyan noticed that this shooting range was quite different from other shooting ranges. Except for them, there was no one else, so they must have reserved the place. Part of the shooting range was indoors and the other was outdoors, and it was equipped with all the facilities one could ever need. When Qi Shuyan was choosing a gun, Zhu Buqing quickly found an opportunity to draw closer. "These rifles aren't suitable for you. Use this lighter pistol first." Qi Shuyan nodded. She thought so too. "Sister Shuyan, don't worry, I'll teach you. I guarantee you'll hit the bullseye." Zhu Buqing was all smiles as he stood behind Qi Shuyan, and was about to draw close to teach her. All of a sudden, he was yanked away by a strong force from behind, which pulled on his collar violently as if he was a chicken being lifted up. Zhu Buqing was instantly furious. This posture was too insulting. He turned his head to see if it was that ambitious leopard who dared touch him. He was stunned, however, when he saw that it was Qi Zhenbai, who was standing tall on the side. When he came back to his senses, he glared furiously at Qi Zhenbai, but conceded in the face of Qi Zhenbai's sharp and majestic gaze. Zhu Buqing was bitter, unsure what his friend was playing at now. He then watched helplessly as the tall and upright Qi Zhenbai took a few steps forward and stood directly behind Qi Shuyan. Qi Shuyan was startled by the sudden move and subconsciously took a few steps forward to avoid Qi Zhenbai's approach. Qi Zhenbai's eyebrows knitted slightly and his sharp eyes flashed. He directly reached out and pulled at one of Qi Shuyan's arms, drawing her closer to his chest with a little effort. Qi Shuyan was caught off guard by the tall man behind her and was stunned. She subconsciously chose to avoid rousing suspicion. "I'll do it myself." This time, Qi Zhenbai didn't even bother to speak. He directly reached out and wrapped his arm around her waist, locking her in front of his hard chest. His eyebrows were sharp and his phoenix eyes narrowed dangerously. The lines of his firm jaw tightened, revealing traces of displeasure. He sounded like he was disciplining an ignorant child as he commanded sternly, "Stand straight." Qi Shuyan subconsciously straightened her back with confusion in her eyes. Unable to avoid his movements, she could only stiffen her face and say nothing. Who knew why this man seemed like a different person today? He wasn't at all as indifferent as usual, but rather was quite cordial. Thinking that it was rare for Zhu Buqing to invite her to the capital, Qi Shuyan couldn't embarrass his friend in front of him, so she could only suppress her feelings and look back from time to time. This tonic pill was too attractive. She didn't notice at all that the way she looked at the man behind her was getting more and more fervent and hungry. Qi Zhenbai sensed her blatant, scorching gaze, and his cold thin lips finally curled up with a trace of a smile. His tone carried a rare hint of derision. "Look in front, don't look at me." Qi Shuyan. When Zhu Buqing first saw Qi Zhenbai's enthusiastic teaching stance, his eyes widened in shock and his heart grew more and more chaotic. As the atmosphere between the two in front of him grew stranger and stranger, absurd thoughts started to run wild in his mind, but it wasn't good to ask directly in someone's face, so he could only suppress his doubts and retreat, depressed and helpless. In the end, his skills weren't up to the mark. Qi Zhenbai was quite satisfied with Zhu Buqing's tactful retreat. Although he was stupid, he still had some self-awareness. Zhu Buqing had no idea how Qi Zhenbai had assessed his helpless withdrawal. If he did, he would have blown up with anger. Qi Zhenbai let go of Qi Shuyan's waist, ignoring the inexplicable longing and reluctance in his heart, and took a small step back behind her so that they were separated by a few centimeters. His two arms came up to wrap lightly around her as he raised her arms before placing his two hands on her own as she held the gun. The difference in size between the two was too great. One was tall and upright, while the other was petite and dainty. Standing behind her like this was almost like holding Qi Shuyan in his arms. Especially when his calloused hands firmly grasped Qi Shuyan's soft ones, it was as if a faint current was flowing into her, which made her somewhat embarrassed and her cheeks slightly red. Qi Zhenbai didn't seem to notice at all as he said in a deep, cold voice, "There are 5 motions before you shoot. Stand, grip, straighten, lift, and position yourself. Both your feet should be as wide apart as your shoulders." As he spoke, he seemed to notice that the distance between Qi Shuyan's feet was too small, so he stretched out one foot to nudge her foot out further. Because of his action, the originally very small gap between them quickly lessened, and Qi Shuyan was accidentally thrown backward as she stumbled and was almost pressed to his chest. Qi Zhenbai felt the softness in his arms and the smile on his lips unconsciously deepened. He narrowed his eyes in satisfaction and looked at her a few more times. Before he could say anything, Zhu Buqing coughed and immediately said, "Zhenbai, don't make things difficult for Sister Shuyan. How about we have a round?" Chapter 65. A Man's Possession, 2, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Are you sure? Qi Zhenbai turned his head and glanced at Zhu Buqing nonchalantly, but didn't agree immediately. There was some pressure and sharpness in the pair of phoenix eyes under his thick, slanted eyebrows. Especially since he was a little taller than Zhu Buqing, his entire body exuded discouragement when he looked down at Zhu Buqing. Bdnv on the contrary, when Qi Shuyan, who was in Qi Zhenbai's arms, heard Zhu Buqing's words, she took the opportunity to struggle free. "You guys play, don't worry about me." "Of course. Look, Sister Shuyan has agreed, so what reason do you have to refuse? Besides, I've long wanted to have a match with you. Zhenbai, are you coming?" Zhu Buqing hurriedly urged with a smile. After the warm and fragrant jade in Qi Zhenbai's arms left, his cold slender eyes darkened and flickered. Looking at Zhu Buqing, who was urging him expectantly, his thin lips curled and he agreed with a half-smile. "As you wish." When Zhu Buqing met Qi Zhenbai's black and cold eyes, his momentum subconsciously faltered. When he noticed Qi Shuyan on the side, however, he immediately straightened his back, coughed twice, and cleared his throat. "Zhenbai, let me remind you that although we're friends, a competition is a competition. Don't expect me to go easy on you or have mercy." Qi Zhenbai raised his eyebrows. He didn't expect Zhu Buqing to really have eaten the guts of an ambitious leopard today, to actually dare provoke him. The smile on his lips deepened this time, but his chiseled, sharp features revealed a trace of fierceness. His dark eyes, which resembled deep pools, were unclear with some emotion. He nodded and said, "You're right. A competition is a competition. I'll definitely do my best." When Zhu Buqing heard this, his heart thumped non-stop, but he wouldn't admit defeat, especially when he was still in front of Sister Shuyan. Even though he was terrified, he still swallowed his saliva and stiffened his neck as he said calmly, "Zhenbai, you're right. That's how it is." He turned to Qi Shuyan and grinned. "Sister Shuyan, go sit on the sofa in the rest area. There are snacks and drinks there." Qi Shuyan was also amused and beamed from ear to ear. "Okay, then I'll go sit over there." When Qi Shuyan walked away, Zhu Buqing, who had just acted all imposing and dared to openly provoke Qi Zhenbai, immediately deflated like a balloon. With a fawning smile on his face, he leaned over and said, "Zhenbai, I'm kidding. I absolutely didn't provoke you. Don't go all out. I won't be able to take it." He glanced at the rest area, winked and sounded Qi Zhenbai out. "Zhenbai, I'm not really going to compete with you. Didn't I tell you on the phone that I want to woo Sister Shuyan? You see, Sister Shuyan and I are a match made in heaven. So, Zhenbai, your brother's lifetime happiness is entrusted to you. You have to perform well. Qi Zhenbai's eyebrows knitted slightly and his face quickly hardened. He sneered inwardly, but his face was expressionless and indifferent. "I'll perform well." Hearing Qi Zhenbai's words, Zhu Buqing was finally slightly relieved. To be safe, he wanted to give a few more detailed instructions, but Qi Zhenbai was already too impatient to hear him speak and heartlessly walked away. Qi Zhenbai and Zhu Buqing moved to the large field beside the shooting range for their competition. This was different from the previous simple and motionless target shooting on level terrain. This time, they chose a more complex and comprehensive obstacle course which mimicked actual combat. 0 meters past the starting point, there would be countless moving targets which needed to be hit in a particular order. In addition, a player needed to switch guns several times and assemble the guns themselves on the course. It was a competition to see who could complete the obstacle course the quickest while also testing their accuracy. Qi Zhenbai let Zhu Buqing choose the gun type and competition format first. When Zhu Buqing saw this, his eyes instantly lit up as he realized that Zhenbai really was going easy on him as he wanted by letting him choose what he was best at. He instantly perked up and was extremely relieved. Zhenbai was so smart, what was there to worry about? Zhenbai could definitely deal with whatever was thrown at him. Zhu Buqing took the lead. When he stood on the field with a gun in hand, his usual frivolous demeanor changed drastically, and he looked like a professional hunter. His eyes were sharp as he passed through the obstacles one after another. Whether it was shooting or assembling a gun, he kept up this momentum. When he reached the finish line, Qi Shuyan gave him face and clapped enthusiastically. Zhu Buqing secretly wiped at the non-existent beads of sweat on his forehead and let out a shaky breath. Seeing Sister Shuyan clapping, he was so happy that his mouth was about to split open all the way to his ears. In fact, he was sure that he had performed extraordinarily well this time, with much fewer mistakes. Compared with his friend Zhenbai, however, he was still far inferior. But later, with Zhenbai going easy on him, Zhu Buqing's image in Sister Shuyan's heart would become much greater. The more Zhu Buqing thought about it, the brighter his smile became, and he urged, "Zhenbai, it's your turn." Seeing Qi Zhenbai step out, he secretly gave him a wink, in case he forgot that the two had just discussed going easy on him. Qi Zhenbai stared straight ahead and paid no attention to Zhu Buqing's wink. He had already gone easy on Zhu Buqing by letting him choose the gun that was his specialty and the competition format. Then, Zhu Buqing's expectant gaze turned helpless as he watched a frosty-faced Qi Zhenbai assemble the gun with extreme familiarity and indifference. Seeing Qi Zhenbai's posture, Zhu Buqing inexplicably had a bad feeling. Sure enough, after waiting silently for a long while, Zhenbai raised his hand and fired continuously without moving. A series of bullet rings didn't even leave their positions. Stopping to assemble his gun didn't stop Qi Zhenbai from pummeling the bullseye each time. Under the sunlight, the tall man's posture didn't change as his entire body emitted a cold domineering aura and oppressive pressure. He looked utterly unapproachable and dazzled the eye as he completely crushed the competition. Zhu Buqing's eyes widened in astonishment. What happened to going easy? He glanced at Qi Shuyan, who was already standing up and looking around with shining eyes, with a bitter face. While Zhu Buqing mocked his best friend inwardly, on the field, Qi Zhenbai's proficiency increased. He was like a hunter on a large hunt in the forest, cold-hearted and agile. By the time Zhu Buqing came back to his senses, the man beside him had already put the gun back on the table, and the latter said faintly, "It's over. Keep your distance from my woman from now on." Zhu Buqing had already confirmed some of his speculations at this point, but hearing his best friend say something like, "Keep your distance from my woman," still blew Zhu Buqing's mind. He gaped and even stuttered despite his usually glib tongue. Zhenbai, when did this happen? No, when did you hook up with Sister Shuyan? Qi Zhenbai's cold gaze shifted away from Zhu Buqing's face to fall on a certain heartless woman not far away. His eyes were extremely complex. It was true that when he heard Celestial Master Zhang say that they were fated to marry, he didn't believe it. Qi Zhenbai didn't believe in fate, and only believed that man's wisdom would prevail. As long as nothing happened, who could truly determine what would happen in the future? So long as he didn't want to admit it, who would dare force him? But now, he changed his mind. Whether it was that prediction or the fact that he didn't feel an aversion to this woman, he realized that since she might be his in the future, how could he give her up and let himself be cuckolded? Whether or not it was a man's desire to monopolize her, he wasn't prepared to let the woman cuckold him. Chapter 66. Ambiguous Image. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Zhu Buqing followed Qi Zhenbai's gaze and saw Qi Shuyan sitting on the sofa not far away. His thoughts, which were originally as muddled as paste, instantly cleared up. No wonder. He recalled what he said on the phone, and how Zhenbai had hurriedly given him another call and even rushed over, which was already very out of character for him. Damn, was this the first time he had ever seen Zhenbai jealous? Zhu Buqing couldn't be blamed for acting like this. Even someone who lived cleanly and honestly like he did for so many years already had several girlfriends. Zhenbai, on the other hand, had a pure heart and few desires. He wouldn't even let anyone touch the corner of his clothes. When he encountered someone who wanted to crawl into his bed, Zhenbai could make them back off with a disgusted expression like he was looking at trash. This had several times made Zhu Buqing want to find a few boys for Zhenbai to try. Zhu Buqing had once thought that given his best friend's personality, he would definitely die alone. Who would have thought that his friend's heart would be moved one day, and coincidentally, it was by a girl whom Zhu Buqing had also taken a fancy to. Of course, in Zhu Buqing's heart, his brothers came first. Women weren't like clothes that could be changed as you please, but they still weren't better than his own brothers. Besides, he had only met Sister Shuyan a few times, and he still had more of a favorable impression of her than actual feelings. Now, there was no point in talking about liking her. Besides, to be honest, more than him wooing someone, he found it even more interesting to watch Zhenbai chase someone and fall in love. If Zhenbai really married her, then as Zhenbai's best brother, he would benefit a lot from those talismans in the future. With Zhenbai stepping forward, was there a reason to think he wouldn't be able to woo her? His success rate would be much higher than Zhu Buqing's. Zhenbai, you hit it too well. Zhu Buqing adjusted his mentality without the slightest bit of embarrassment, and instead complained, if you had told me earlier, I definitely wouldn't have fought with you. Qi Zhenbai's hands were in his pockets, his eyes majestic and sharp. He looked down at Zhu Buqing and calmly stressed each word. Bring it on. Zhu Buqing caught a hint of ruthlessness in his best friend's extremely calm face. How would he dare take the initiative? He quickly waved his hand and switched to flattering Qi Shuyan. Don't. I just think Sister Shuyan is nice and capable, alright. Junbai, you really have good taste. Qi Junbai didn't speak and just looked at the woman not far away. Qi Shuyan happened to meet the gaze of the tall man and thought that he was greeting her. Although she wanted to avoid arousing suspicion, it wasn't good to snub someone for no reason. Qi Shuyan simply grinned. Qi Junbai's heart thumped. Sure enough, this woman had been looking at him since the beginning. Qi Junbai realized that she had a crush on him, and his gloom was swept away as his mood turned splendid. He had never doubted his charm. One was a pearl and the other a grain of sand. Anyone with a brain would know which one to choose. His thin lips curved slightly and he hummed softly in response to Zhu Bucheng. Zhu Bucheng looked at the man and woman in front of him and was fed dog food for no reason. At the same time, he was so scared by the unusual gentleness on his best friend's face that he almost pissed his pants. Actually, Qi Shuyan really hadn't been trading looks with Qi Junbai the entire time like Zhu Bucheng imagined. After greeting Qi Junbai, her eyes fell on Zhu Bucheng. She wanted to ask when this would end. She vaguely noticed that Zhu Bucheng's expression was a bit off, and from time to time, he would look at her and Qi Junbai with a strange expression. She had questions in her heart, but couldn't go up and suddenly disturb the pair. Qi Junbai noticed that the woman not far away didn't want to hang around much longer, so he didn't intend to stay. He tilted his head and said to Zhu Bucheng, "I'll leave you to it." With that, he walked in Qi Shuyan's direction and looked at the woman waiting eagerly in front of him. His cold and hard figure couldn't help but soften a bit. "Want to leave? Follow me." Qi Shuyan hadn't reacted yet and stared blankly as the man in front of her turned around and left. For a moment, she didn't know what he and Zhu Bucheng were planning. She quickly looked at Zhu Bucheng, but before Zhu Bucheng could utter a word, he saw his tall and majestic friend stop not far away and look over coldly. He immediately quivered in fright. Now that Zhu Bucheng knew about his best friend's thoughts and possessiveness toward Sister Shuyan, how could he dare interrupt and spoil Junbai's fun? He quickly adapted to the situation and said, "Sister Shuyan, I happen to have something on, so I'll have Junbai send you off first." In the end, Qi Shuyan had to catch up with the man she wanted to avoid. In the car, Qi Shuyan did her best to calmly shift toward the window and away from Qi Junbai, and she leaned her head against the glass that it was still all right when Zhu Bucheng was still around, but when it was just the two of them, the ambiguous images that she had seen last time inexplicably flashed through her mind whenever she looked at Qi Junbai. It made her feel embarrassed and doubt life no matter how she thought about it. Although she felt her calculation was accurate, she still wasn't convinced that she would become his mistress. She also couldn't imagine such a cold and fussy germaphobe being so lascivious. "Are you sleepy?" Qi Junbai glanced at the woman, who kept shifting away, and put an arm around her shoulders in a natural move as he indicated his own shoulder. "Be careful. You can rest here." Qi Junbai still had to show some concern and nurture feelings. Unfortunately, even though he was showing care, his tone was flat and emotionless. Qi Shuyan was immediately jolted awake by Qi Junbai's movements and she wondered if this man's illness was acting up again. She immediately sat up straight and shook her head. No, I'm not sleepy." Qi Junbai's brow furrowed slightly and his eyes examined her as if he was puzzled. His handsome face was dim and unclear in the shadows, and his pretty and sharp phoenix eyes were bottomless. He suddenly said, "What did you foresee last time?" His tone was casual, and Qi Shuyan didn't think much about it. "No, I didn't see anything. It's my skills that aren't good enough," Qi Shuyan answered quickly. "Oh." Qi Junbai's eyes were sharp and compelling, and he grabbed her wrist. "Is it just because you aren't good enough that your fortune-telling doesn't work all the time?" Was he questioning her professional capability? Qi Shuyan could tolerate anything, but not this. She didn't hide from Qi Junbai's sharp gaze, but looked him straight in the eye and retorted in all seriousness, "Everyone's fate and fortune is different, and they're affected by all sorts of factors. It's normal to calculate wrongly and not calculate it. Really? Qi Zhenbai feigned a nod. Then calculate again. Qi Shuyan. Qi Shuyan looked at Qi Zhenbai, her eyes flashing. Wait. Maybe she really was mistaken last time. Okay, then, I'll calculate again. Qi Shuyan tested Qi Zhenbai. Even if I can't calculate anything, you can't label me. Forget it. She originally wanted to say that he couldn't label her a swindler, but they wouldn't have much to do with each other anyway, so he could do whatever he wanted. Qi Shuyan wanted to break free of Qi Zhenbai's right hand that was locked around her wrist, but Qi Zhenbai glanced at her indifferently. Didn't you want to do this last time? Qi Shuyan took a deep breath and couldn't be bothered to talk to Qi Zhenbai. She calmed down, emptied her mind, and quickly calculated. Soon, countless images flashed through her mind, and when she focused, they quickly slowed down. When Qi Shuyan saw the two people in the image, she felt inexplicably nervous. But she then saw that the two of them were keeping their distance from each other, plus there were a lot of other people around. She heaved a sigh of relief. It was like she had thought, she must have miscalculated before. Just as Qi Shuyan sighed with relief, she saw everyone else in the living room withdraw. She saw herself glare fiercely at Qi Zhenbai, then turn her head and go up the stairs. Qi Zhenbai followed suit and directly picked up the woman in the hallway. The scene changed and Qi Zhenbai threw her onto the bed. Qi Shuyan was furious. How dare he force himself on her? Then, she watched Qi Zhenbai, who was dressed in a pressed suit, not only deftly and tyrannically take off her underwear, but also bend down on one knee between her legs. Qi Shuyan. Exactly who is the mistress? Chapter 67. Shattered. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Qi Shuyan's closed eyes snapped open. She turned pale and immediately drew her hand back. She didn't know if it was because of the image just now, but her hand, which had just touched the man, felt very hot. Her head was muddled and she felt embarrassed. This stimulation was too much for her to bear. It was even more embarrassing than what she had seen last time. If there was a hole in the car right now, she would just burrow inside and not come out. Could she say that she regretted doing a divination for this man? Even if she was beaten to death, she would never do it again. Qi Shuyan took a deep breath. Unfortunately, she couldn't calm down no matter what. She didn't care if the man next to her sensed the peculiarity or not as she immediately blurted out, "Stop the car, I want to get out." Qi Zhenbai had long sensed the peculiarity in the woman next to him, and he scrutinized her without speaking for a long time. Coincidentally, there was a red light in front. Qi Zhenbai stepped on the brakes and examined her with a sharp, thoughtful gaze. Only then did Qi Shuyan realize that she had lost her composure, and she hurriedly found an excuse she thought was reasonable. "Young Master Qi, you can just drop me off here. I still have something to do, so I'll head off myself." "What did you calculate?" Qi Zhenbai suddenly asked in a low voice. It would have been fine if he hadn't asked, but when he did, Qi Shuyan immediately thought of that image just now which upended her worldview and choked. Qi Zhenbai subconsciously wanted to pat her back to soothe her, but Qi Shuyan got goosebumps and she yelled feebly, "Don't touch me." Qi Zhenbai's face turned black at his woman's dislike. Temporarily ignoring the fact that she dared to dislike him, he regained his composure. If he already knew what the outcome was after closely observing the woman next to him before, he was now really curious to know what else this woman had seen, apart from them being a couple, to make her lose her composure. After all, she had already calculated last time that they would be a couple. There was no reason for her reaction to be so violent this time, unless she had seen something even more stimulating, and he couldn't help wondering. Qi Shuyan also realized that she had lost her composure again, and was creeped out by his cold and stern gaze. Fortunately, she still had her senses about her. She knew that she couldn't afford to offend the man next to her, at least not for now. She hurriedly explained, "Young Master Qi, I'm sorry. I wasn't feeling well just now." Qi Zhenbai's face softened. "What's wrong?" It's fine now." As Qi Shuyen spoke, she couldn't help but recall the image that had just shattered the limits of her worldview and confirmed certain facts. For a moment, she didn't know whether to laugh or cry. To be honest, this man's distinctive family background, looks and abilities were simply beyond compare. If such a man truly released hormones, even men would be drawn to him like moths to a flame, to say nothing of women. Who wouldn't like him? But she still had the same thoughts as before. Firstly, she wasn't interested, and secondly, she knew that no matter how good this man was, he would die early. As for family background and looks, they couldn't be eaten. She really wasn't interested in becoming the mistress of this short-lived man. Qi Shuyen was looking to the side as she thought this, and she abruptly met the man's cold, expressionless gaze. She stared fixedly, unable to figure out how a man like this could do something so outrageous. "Okay, can we talk now?" Qi Zhenbai asked indifferently. Qi Shuyen originally wanted to fool the man in front of her, but her emotions had been too obvious just now. If she said she hadn't calculated it, he wouldn't believe her either, but it was impossible for her to tell him the truth. Qi Shuyen gritted her teeth and gave a mix of truth and lies. "Young Master Qi, I calculated that you'll be blessed with a life of riches and everything will go your way. It's just that there's a huge hurdle waiting for you when you turn 29 years old. You'll live a life of riches and glory, but if you can't get past this hurdle, you will be in some danger." The man's tone remained steady and deep as his long fingers tapped on the steering wheel rhythmically, as if he was listening and yet not. "Anything else to add?" "Nothing else." "Is that so?" Qi Zhenbai was especially dissatisfied with these two words. His eyes fell on the woman's face and he suddenly sneered softly. He turned his head and suddenly said, "But from what I know, telling someone's fortune is a no-brainer, unless the celestial master's skills aren't profound enough, or they calculated it, but it's something that can't be said." "Is it something that Master Qi finds hard to talk about?" Qi Shuyen's right eyelid twitched when she heard this, and the man's deep and rational voice rang out unhurriedly. "Or I should ask, does Master Qi and I in the future share?" Seeing the woman in front of him grow whiter and more nervous, Qi Zhenbai didn't spit out the words, "a binding fate," for a long while. Qi Zhenbai's eyes dimmed, but he said directly, "I believe that Miss Qi is a highly skilled celestial master. Not only can you divine events, you can even foresee outcomes by touching people. Why don't you describe in detail what you just foresaw to me?" Qi Shuyen could have remained calm, but she was dazed by the bombs that the man next to her dropped on her head one after another. She thought she had been pretty covert, but never expected this man, with his profound thinking, to still figure things out after just a few short encounters. At the thought of being found out, Qi Shuyen felt as if a basin of cold water had been poured over her head in the dead of winter. She felt cold from head to toe, and deeply apprehensive. Damn, no wonder this man would die early. Even regular friends wouldn't want to associate with such a highly intelligent and shrewd person, to say nothing of Qi Shuyen who was his fated partner or whatever. If only they could remain strangers to each other, if she was with such a person, she would be seen through sooner or later. Qi Shuyen admitted that she still had many secrets. As the saying went, treasuring a jade ring would become a crime. There was no way she wanted to end up in a research institute. She quashed the panic in her heart and calmed down. Naturally, she didn't want to reveal her trump card, that she could foresee the future. Knowing that the man in front of her wasn't easy to fool, she might as well give him 9 parts truth and 1 part lie. "Young Master Qi is indeed young Master Qi. You've managed to guess pretty much most of it. I'm really impressed. I can indeed rely on touch to foresee some images, but I can't do it for everyone. Often, it's unlucky devils about to face a catastrophe or some very close friends. The number of times I can foresee things is limited to once a month. After confirming that she really could foresee things through touch, Qi Zhenbai narrowed his eyes and remained silent. Deep inside, however, he still couldn't hide his shock as he stared unwaveringly at the woman in front of him. Qi Shuyan also had an ugly look on her face as she stifled the anger in her heart. The trump card that she had been hiding was revealed so easily. From her past life to this life, there were few things that could put her at a disadvantage. Today, however, she had unexpectedly fallen into the hands of this man. While she wasn't that narrow-minded, her heart wasn't that big either. How could she not give as good as she got? With a glint in her eyes, Qi Shuyan's lips curved up in a faint smile. That's right, young Master Qi, you wanted me to describe what I saw in detail to you. Sure, why not? Without waiting for the man in front of her to speak, Qi Shuyan's lips curved up as she suddenly threw away her moral integrity and spoke a mix of truth and lies. I saw you, young Master Qi, strip naked and kneel between a woman's legs to do an unspeakable thing. The image was too shocking for an outsider like me. Young Master Qi, would you like me to describe it in further detail? Qi Zhenbai's face immediately turned green. 1. Annotation text missing. Chapter 68. Zhenbai, Sister Shuyan confessed to me. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The two parted on bad terms, but despite his cold face, Qi Zhenbai still sent her to the nearest 5-star hotel. Elsewhere, Zhu Bucheng was also at a hotel. After swimming around the pool, he put on his bathrobe and lay on a deck chair next to the pool. Looking at his phone on the table next to him, his heart itched. He was really too interested in his best friend, who hadn't blossomed for decades, suddenly courting a woman. Had it not been for his fear of Zhenbai's formidable daring over the years, he would have joined the gossip long ago. He was utterly in awe of Zhenbai's abilities and IQ, but he didn't really have much confidence in him dating. He wondered if Zhenbai knew how to be more solicitous and considerate when chasing girls. He was 120% skeptical. Zhu Bucheng finally couldn't help but reach out and pick up the phone on the table. He didn't dare ask Zhenbai, but Sister Shuyan was still easier to talk to, so he might be able to find out something from her. Zhu Bucheng made up his mind and immediately called Qi Shuyan. Sister Shuyan, how was your date with Zhenbai? How do you feel? Is there anything you want to ask me? Since we're close, I'll tell you everything I know. I can even tell you how old Zhenbai was when he peed in bed. The last line was obviously a tease. When Qi Shuyan heard the word date and thought of Qi Zhenbai's face, her face turned black for a moment before it quickly went back to its natural color. She almost blurted out, not interested, but corrected herself so that it came across as polite courtesy. It was all right. Young Master Qi is quite good. However, young Master Zhu, young Master Qi and I have a pure relationship. Don't joke around. Qi Shuyan spoke in a relaxed tone and took his words as a joke without thinking much about it. On the other end of the line, Zhu Bucheng thought that his friend would take the initiative to make progress with Sister Shuyan tonight. It wasn't until he heard her that he realized there hadn't been the slightest bit of progress in Zhenbai's courtship. How distant did Sister Shuyan's tone sound? It was worse than when she was talking to him. Zhu Bucheng lamented for his best friend, but at the same time gloated a little. Who asked this friend of his to crush him in terms of intelligence, abilities, and all other aspects since birth? Even his own parents would always say that Zhenbai was good and there was nothing bad about him. They couldn't wait for Zhenbai to be their own son. Before he met Sister Shuyan, Zhu Bucheng had also thought that Zhenbai was omnipotent. Wasn't he experiencing a setback here in love? Zhu Bucheng couldn't wait for his best friend to obediently come to his door and learn from him. Maybe someday, when he was in a good mood, he would teach him a few moves so that his parents could see him crushing Zhenbai and he could show off at the same time. Zhu Bucheng was thinking pretty good thoughts and couldn't be any more pleased, but this still required Sister Shuyan's cooperation. His eyes flashed and he suddenly said out of the blue, Sister Shuyan, do you know what a man likes most? Without waiting for Qi Shuyan to speak, Zhu Buqing hurriedly said, the desire to conquer. The more a man can't have something, the more he wants it. The more he wants it in the future, the more he cherishes it. So, Sister Shuyan, however outstanding the partner we're trying to please is however hard we hold on, and with all our might. Let him be the one to confess to you, only then can you. Seeing that Zhu Buqing's jokes were becoming more and more outrageous, Qi Shuyan helplessly interrupted his wild flights of fancy. Young Master Zhu, let me warn you, I made your young Master Qi quite unhappy today. When the time comes, don't blame me if he takes his anger out on you for joking about me in front of him. As for me and this young Master Qi, it's impossible between the two of us. Your young Master Qi looks down on me, there's no way he'd be interested in me. Qi Shuyan didn't wait for Zhu Buqing to respond and was no longer interested in talking to him about Qi Zhenbai, so she found an excuse and hung up. But before hanging up, Qi Shuyan added with a bit of mocking, of course, if you fancy me, young Master Zhu, I can consider it. Zhu Buqing, who was suddenly confessed to, was stupefied. Wait a minute, did Sister Shuyan fancy him instead of Zhenbai? Zhu Buqing's heart quivered instead of being pleased. Please don't that he didn't want to snatch a woman from Zhenbai, but this Sister Shuyan had too good an eye. Zhu Buqing was happy at this thought, and the more he thought about it, the more smug he became. Tonight could be considered the most glorious day of his life. For a moment, he was so pleased with himself that he forgot his place. He called his best friend directly and gloated, Zhenbai, how was your date with Sister Shuyan today? Did she confess to you? She confessed to me just now and asked if I was interested in her. Qi Zhenbai had already returned to his private villa by then and had just finished his shower in raging fury. At the thought of what the woman in the car had said today, his face still couldn't help turning hard despite his receding anger. On the way back to the villa, Qi Zhenbai had clearly analyzed the other party's half-truths, so naturally, he took those words as a provocation and not an outcome. He was a normal man, and naturally had the chauvinism of normal men. Moreover, it was even stronger than that of normal men. He liked to have everything under control. Even though he hadn't thought much about his future wife, he still instinctively hoped that no matter how powerful her background was or how successful she was in her career, she would return home to take good care of her husband and educate her children. It was impossible for him to kneel between a woman's legs. For a moment, his thoughts landed on that woman. Who knew if Zhu Buqing was too unlucky, but with his words, he added fuel to the fire. Qi Zhenbai's face which had just relaxed was now as dark as ink as he asked in a half-imposing, half-threatening tone, what did you say? The two of them were good friends, there was no way Zhu Buqing couldn't tell that his friend was getting angry. How would he dare provoke this ancestor into flying off the handle? It was very rare for this friend of his to fly into a rage, but when he did, it was called terror. Even if he wasn't the target of Zhenbai's fury, he could still be scared shitless. Zhu Buqing simply didn't dare to think of that scene. This time, moreover, Zhenbai was pissed at him. Zhu Buqing quickly nervously clarified, it was Sister Shuyan who confessed, not me. No, that's wrong. Sister Shuyan was joking with me. We were joking with each other. Zhu Buqing was too afraid of his friend flipping out, so he simply hung up. In the villa, Qi Zhenbai was so angry that his lungs shook. It felt like his breath was stuck in his throat. He dialed Zhu Buqing's number. Zhenbai. After a while, Zhu Buqing's soft voice trembled over the line. How could Qi Zhenbai not know that he was just venting his anger? How could a woman compare with their friendship of so many years? But despite the fact that the two of them were probably joking, he inexplicably felt a pain in his chest at the thought of that woman getting along with another man. He quashed his anger and spat out, nothing. After hanging up, he smashed his phone, and it shattered into pieces. Zhenbai's anger last night made Zhu Buqing feel that his friend had blown the matter out of proportion, but it also indirectly made him understand Sister Shuyan's place in his best friend's heart. That his joke about him and Sister Shuyan could make his friend so angry was simply unprecedented. He originally intended to create some more opportunities for his friend, but as soon as he got up, he saw Father Zhu carrying a briefcase and his head down in contemplation, as if troubled. "Dad, you're back from work already. Why aren't you at the company?" Zhu Bucheng took a step forward and asked in concern. Father Zhu looked up and saw Zhu Bucheng, then shook his head and waved his hand. "Don't mention it. Director Yang and I went to inspect the construction site in the afternoon. Something happened again. If this goes on, construction of the building will definitely be delayed significantly." Chapter 69. Face.slapping, 1, you are listening at novelfull.audio. At Father Zhu's words, Zhu Bucheng also remembered. His family's company was in the wood business, and had been cooperating with Hanyu Company recently. Hanyu Company was in the construction business and things weren't going well. There had been no major accidents at the construction site, but there had already been dozens of minor mishaps one after another. If it wasn't the excavators breaking down, it was some of the migrant workers getting injured at the construction site. In the most serious instance, a worker fell from a crane and broke his leg. All kinds of small accidents never stopped happening, even with the cameras set up at the construction site, they couldn't be avoided. "Dad, why does it seem like all this bad luck is part of the same thing?" Zhu Bucheng felt suspicious, and suddenly had a thought. "Why don't you let Shuyan take a look? It might be a feng shui problem." Father Zhu thought about it and also felt that these accidents didn't make sense. Many of the machines were new, so it was impossible for them to break down for no reason. Thinking of Qi Shuyan, his depression was swept away and he slapped his thigh fiercely, his eyes bright. "That's right, what's wrong with your father's memory? Bucheng, come with me." "Dad, there's no rush, is there?" Zhu Bucheng said bewilderedly. His father had just come back, why was he going out again? Father Zhu glared at Zhu Bucheng. "Cut the crap. This is proper business, so pick yourself up. Besides, is it proper for me to drop in on my own?" Zhu Bucheng secretly mocked him in his heart. So two people dropping in was proper. Qi Shuyan had just gotten off the phone with Zhu Bucheng and didn't expect Father Zhu and Zhu Bucheng to already be at the door when she turned around. She was a bit surprised, but upon hearing Father Zhu's request, she readily agreed. In any case, she had time on her hands. Qi Shuyan, Father Zhu and Zhu Bucheng took a car to Sandalwood Gardens. "We cooperated with Hanyu Company during the previous stages, and we never had any problems before. This is the fourth stage, but who would have thought things would happen one after another? If we let things go on like this, I'm afraid it'll delay construction," Father Zhu explained in detail to Qi Shuyan as he got out of the car. Qi Shuyan nodded, lost in thought. She already had some understanding and a guess about the situation. If these minor accidents weren't man-made, then there was a high chance that there was something wrong with this piece of land. That's right. That Director Yang might lose all his hair from worry. I thought I picked up a bargain when I bought this piece of land at base price off a bankrupt tycoon. Who would have thought it would be this cursed? Zhu Bucheng also said, but nothing seemed to have happened before. It's really strange. Qi Shuyan listened to Zhu Bucheng and Father Zhu's conversation and didn't make any remarks from beginning to end. Her guess was ultimately just a guess, and she had to see it for herself to know exactly what the situation was like. Father Zhu took Qi Shuyan and Zhu Bucheng around the construction site, and Qi Shuyan quickly figured out the situation. While Father Zhu and the others were wandering around the construction site, they ran into Hanyu's boss, who was also the boss of the construction site, Director Yang. A man in a Taoist robe stood next to the boss of Hanyu Company, holding a compass in his hand and chanting incoherent spells. He wandered repeatedly around Sandalwood Gardens like he was singing an opera, and seemed to be measuring something. "Sigh, Boss Yang, you really miscalculated. How could you buy a piece of land filled with such dense resentment and murderous intent? The master in the Taoist robe let out a long sigh and shook his head. Is it really a problem with this piece of land? No wonder it was so cheap. Boss Yang was alarmed and asked hurriedly, then, does master have a way to resolve it? The master stroked his long beard and said benevolently, if this had continued, there would have been a fire calamity. Fortunately, Boss Yang is blessed to have met me. This place is a bit tricky for others, but in my eyes, it's just so. After I do the ritual, I'll use a magic weapon to eliminate the resentment and baleful aura here. Boss Yang heaved a sigh of relief. Then, I'll leave it to master. It's just that the price of this magic weapon is a bit high. But it's the most effective at suppressing grievances and baleful aura. The master hesitated. It's fine, it's fine. Master, just do it, as long as it's effective. Boss Yang waved his hand. When he turned his head, he saw Father Zhu and the other two. Director Zhu, what are you doing here? Boss Yang greeted them with a smile, and glanced at the two people behind Father Zhu. Father Zhu frowned deeply when he saw Director Yang, his expression a little dark. Although he didn't understand the customs of celestial masters, he at least knew that one shouldn't bother two masters over the same matter. He looked at Qi Shuyan apprehensively. After all, many capable celestial masters were proud people. Even if she had a good personality, it would be hard for her not to get angry in this situation. Moreover, Boss Yang had asked him to find a master previously, but he found one himself. Obviously, he didn't trust Father Zhu. Director Yang, if you had said earlier that you would be looking for a master yourself, I wouldn't have wasted time inviting Master Qi over. Father Zhu's gaze was cold and his tone was a bit harsh. Boss Yang looked around in surprise. Director Zhu, where is the master you hired? Father Zhu frowned and stretched out a hand to introduce Qi Shuyan on the side. This is the Master Qi I invited. Boss Yang immediately smiled and said, Director Zhu, don't joke. Seeing Father Zhu's serious face, however, he was surprised and frowned, and looked a bit unhappy. His eyes were filled with suspicion, and his smile faded. He said indifferently, then, if this master is free, take a look around. After saying that, he ignored Father Zhu and the others, and completely didn't take any notice of Qi Shuyan. Father Zhu's face immediately turned hard. He knew Qi Shuyan's abilities, but in Boss Yang's eyes, Qi Shuyan was less credible than that master in a Taoist robe. On the side, Master Zhang in the Taoist robe also heard their conversation. He rolled his eyes and immediately shifted his slightly hostile gaze to Qi Shuyan. Seeing that Qi Shuyan was just a young girl, however, he secretly sighed in relief. Little girl, are you a feng shui master too? Master Zhang pursed his lips, his eyes filled with contempt. He lectured righteously, feng shui may seem mysterious, but it's actually deep and profound. Even if flowery words can deceive someone for a moment, they can't deceive a person for a lifetime. Hurting others will ultimately harm oneself and mislead others. When that happens, one's good fortune will be harmed. Indeed, real and fake aside, people always judge a book by its cover. Qi Shuyan smiled faintly and said, they think that a person in a Taoist robe can be a master, but that master is too worthless. Celestial Master Zhang didn't expect this gentle and quiet little girl to have such a sharp tongue. His beard puffed up and he glared angrily. What do you mean? You really boast shamelessly, coming out to swindle others at such a young age. This poor Taoist was going to give you some kind advice, but who knew you would be so sharp-tongued? Women and villains really are the hardest to educate. I'm just telling the truth. Celestial Master Zhang stroked his beard and smiled coldly with contempt. Since you think you're so powerful, have you seen anything? Tell me what's going on here. Qi Shuyan glanced at him indifferently. Why should I tell you? You don't know, do you, little girl? You lied without thinking and exposed yourself. Celestial Master Zhang was proud, as if he had expected it. What a fool. I'll point the way for you. Since you don't appreciate my kindness, don't blame me for not warning you. If you continue like this, something will happen sooner or later. He waved the sleeves of his elegant Taoist robe. Boss, it's bad. A person in charge ran over hurriedly. What's wrong again? Boss Yang was displeased. Someone is going to jump off a building, and it's a child. Chapter 70. Jinbai, your wife is here. You are listening at novelfull.audio. When Boss Yang heard this, his face changed drastically and he became depressed and anxious. What the hell is this? Not only adults, but children are also jumping off buildings now. They're already learning not to be good when they're so young. Although Boss Yang complained, he had to rush over, and the others followed him to the scene. A lot of people had already gathered. Rescue workers and psychologists were also trying to persuade the child, and police cars were also rushing over. Boss Yang looked at the floor that the child was on and panicked. That was the 8th floor. If this child took another step forward, Boss Yang's construction company was finished. He hurriedly looked at Celestial Master Zhang next to him, grabbed his sleeve, and said anxiously, Celestial Master Zhang, hurry and think of something. You mustn't let anything happen to that child, otherwise, what will happen to this land of mine? Cold sweat broke out on Celestial Master Zhang's forehead. Looking at the high floor, he did his best to maintain his sage-like image. Racking his brain, he consoled Boss Yang. Boss Yang, life and death happen all the time. We can only leave it to fate. Boss Yang frowned and let go of Celestial Master Zhang's sleeve, his eyes filled with doubts. Who had the patience to listen to this now? What he needed was a solution. Boss Yang, who was about to curse out loud, suddenly heard a clear and calm female voice behind him. He turned his head and realized it was the Celestial Master whom Zhu Hongyi had brought over. Only then did he realize that compared with the flustered person next to him, this girl was very calm and unruffled. Looking at her face, Yang Xinda also calmed down a bit. There was no use being anxious now. Uncle, can you find someone in the know and ask if this child has an older sister? Also, does this child's father have an older sister too? Qi Shuyan raised her head and narrowed her eyes in concentration as she spoke to Father Zhu. Father Zhu didn't understand what Qi Shuyan was going to do and a trace of confusion flashed in his eyes, but he didn't ask any more questions and immediately asked around. After a while, however, Zhu Hongyi came back with a strange look on his face. Master Qi, you were right. That child and his father indeed both have older sisters. His father's sister has passed away. As for the child's sister, she usually gets along with him pretty well. Can it be that this child jumping has something to do with his sister? The corners of Qi Shuyan's mouth pulled up in a smile, but there was no smile in her eyes, which were icy cold. She shook her head and said, it has nothing to do with the child's sister, but it has a lot to do with his father's sister. Zhu Hongyi was even more confused now, and still thought that this kid jumping had to do with his sister. When Yang Xinda heard their conversation, a chill suddenly rose up from the bottoms of his feet and his neck turned cold. This piece of land had been bought from the child's father, so he knew the child's family situation very well. But how did this girl know all this, and why did she suddenly bring up the father's sister, Zhengjie, who died many years ago? Was it Sister Zhengjie who had been haunting this land all this time? Oh my God, he's going to jump, he's going to jump. The crowd saw the child leaning forward and was in an uproar. Even Yang Xinda, who had calmed down a little, had his heart in his throat, and he was scared out of his wits. The child on the tall building looked terrified and tired, but his body gradually tilted as his hands looked like they were trying to grab at or push something away behind him. He completely ignored the psychologists on the side, as if he couldn't hear them. Sister Shuyan, it looks like those psychologists are no use. Do you have any ideas? On the side, Zhu Buqing's voice trembled nervously at the thought of the imminent scene. In fact, he didn't know if she could do anything. After all, Qi Shuyan was a celestial master, not a Taoist immortal. It would be strange if they were any use. He's not the one who wants to jump. A little ghost is pushing him from behind, Qi Shuyan said. She pondered for a while and frowned, feeling uncomfortable all over. When young Xinda heard Qi Shuyan's words, he looked at how the child was leaning forward slowly, as if someone really was pushing him from behind. His eyes instantly widened. Why did this child's jumping posture look so strange? All at once, he felt his hair stand on end. Zhu Buqing and Father Zhu also felt their blood run cold when they heard Qi Shuyan. Rubbish. Don't mislead people with lies. Celestial Master Zhang couldn't help but reprimand Qi Shuyan when he heard her. Qi Shuyan didn't even bother to look at him. She took out a yellow piece of paper from her chest pocket, bit her fingertip, lowered her head, and drew stroke after stroke. He's going to fall. Seeing the child fall, Father Zhu couldn't help but cry out in horror. The way the child was falling was too strange. The bottom was filled with concrete and steel. If he fell, his head would definitely be smashed open. By then, Qi Shuyan had already drawn a talisman on the paper with her blood in one go, and when she finished the last stroke, a faint golden light flashed. Picking up the talisman, she threw it in the child's direction. Her slight action didn't draw as much attention as the child jumping off the building, so only Father Zhu and the few others next to Qi Shuyan saw it. Even Yang Xinda saw it clearly. Yang Xinda watched as Qi Shuyan gently waved her hand and the yellow talisman in her hand instantly disappeared, before an inconspicuous golden light struck the child. Sure enough, after her small move, he realized that the falling child was slowing down, and his clothes got caught directly on a windowsill on the second floor. With this loss in momentum, the child landed in the middle of the large inflatable cushion. The child landed on the inflatable cushion and was dazed for a moment, before he quickly started to bawl. Sob. It's a ghost, a ghost. Young Xinda looked at the child crying energetically and saw that he wasn't hurt at all. He then stared blankly at the little girl across from him whom he had doubted earlier. He had seen the child fall from the 8th floor with his own eyes. A normal person would have suffered a serious injury or fracture if they fell from the 2nd floor, let alone the 8th floor. But this little girl casually waved a hand, and the child was unscathed. Godly, this was too godly. Young Xinda's face flushed red with excitement. He turned around and was about to settle scores with the swindler, when he saw that there was no one beside him. Celestial Master Zhang, who had spoken very righteously, was long gone. Young Xinda was distressed and bitter. Recalling how he had offended a true celestial master in favor of a fake swindler, his intestines turned green. He was afraid that this little girl would bear a grudge. While he was struggling over whether to approach her or not, who would have thought that she would give a peace talisman to the child and then leave? Father Zhu and Zhu Buqing both sighed with relief. The way they looked at Qi Shuyan was different once more. Father Zhu's eyes in particular glowed. After all, unlike Zhu Buqing, who had experienced it for himself, most of what Father Zhu knew was just based on what his son said. Now, however, he could really sense how powerful his son's friend was. He really saw her as a celestial master now, and his face was full of awe and admiration. Zhu Buqing quickly noticed that Qi Shuyan didn't look well. Her face was as white as paper and her lips were pale. He quickly supported her and asked, "Sister Shuyan, what's wrong? Are you unwell?" Qi Shuyan nodded and said nothing. This place was too evil. While drawing a talisman did require a lot of spiritual energy, it shouldn't be to this extent. While she was drawing the talisman, she kept feeling like something was sucking away her spiritual energy endlessly. Moreover, the yin energy in this place was too strong, and muddled her mind a little. "I'm fine. It's just that there's a borrowing array filled with yin energy down there." I'll be fine after I go back and have a nap. Better have someone send the child back first, Qi Shuyan said. I'll go take a look. At Qi Shuyan's words, Father Zhu was finally relieved. Looking at his son holding Qi Shuyan, a thought struck him and he was overjoyed. Somehow, he felt that this might be a good opportunity. He repeatedly instructed his son to take good care of her before he left. Contrary to Father Zhu's good mood, Qi Zhenbai, who was leaning on the front of a car not far away, narrowed his deep, phoenix eyes. His gaze was so sharp that Zhu Bucheng, who was facing him, felt his heart skip a beat, and he hurriedly sucked up to him. Zhenbai, your wife is here.